Hi, I'm Lauren Onkey, Dean of the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Humanities Center at Cuyahoga Community College. And we are here at Tracey's Media Center for a very special interview with the Very Reverend Tracey Lind of Trinity Cathedral here in Cleveland, Ohio, on the occasion of Tracey's retirement from Trinity.
Yeah.
Really glad to have you here, Tracey.
I am delighted to be with you all.
And this will be part of, we're flipping the script on the Dean's Forum, which you've been doing for how long?
Gosh, I was thinking about that the other day. I think maybe I've been doing them for probably 10 years. Since about 2007, we started doing these interviews.
And I was very lucky to be the subject of one of those Dean's Forums.
Right,
so it's
when you were
fun
at the Rock Hall, we talked about music.
Yeah, to flip the script and talk with you. And our subject today is music, because it's been so important to your life, to your ministry, to the life of Trinity Cathedral. And when you announced your retirement, I thought, it would be great to talk with Tracey about the role that music has played for you and some of your favorite songs. Great for me personally because we first met over music. You literally kind of came bounding into my office in the summer of 2013 to talk about how the Rock Hall and Trinity might work together, but really, and we ended up talking a lot about music.
We talked a lot about the spirituality of music and finding God and our own lives in music. Yeah.
So thank you for doing this, and it's got to be a very interesting time. You mentioned a few minutes ago it's a reflective time, so this is part of that process too.
It is. You know, I've been a priest for 30 years, and I'm coming to the end of sort of active ministry in the way that I've always known it, and I'm stepping down from the pulpit at Trinity Cathedral, a place that I've loved and served for 17 years. And so I'm thinking back on my ministry and my sense of call and vocation, and the role that music has played in it, and it's been pretty significant.
Now, Trinity has had a tradition of wonderful music for a long time. Was that something that drew you to, part of what drew you to the cathedral?
Absolutely. I was working on a photography exhibit with a friend in New Jersey, and the profile for the Dean of the Cathedral had arrived in my mailbox out of the blue. And she looked at it and she said, "Oh my God, you have to go there. This is a great place. It's a center of peace and justice and art and music." And when I heard that, I got really excited. And Trinity has had a fabulous, fabulous history of excellent music for really its entire history, its whole time.
And you've enhanced that, certainly.
Well, I've gotten to join in on it. You know, back in the Depression, Trinity every Friday night would host, in cooperation with the Cleveland Museum of Art and the orchestra and Playhouse Square, they would host vaudeville shows and theater and music for all of the unemployed families of the Depression. And our brown bag concerts, I mean, they've been going on for nearly 40 years. Every Wednesday at noon, these concerts. And then we just started expanding the breadth and the reach of the music that we were offering.
So music, I mean, forever is partly how people express their understanding of God, their celebration of God's presence, their mourning. It seems to hit people in a way that perhaps other things don't. Would you?
I think there's real truth in that, and St. Augustine said it this way, which was to sing a prayer is to pray twice. And so the music has always been a part of religious tradition, whether it's hymnody or chant or instrumental music. But I think it's also how people have found spirit and have found community and have found themselves. You know, they say, you know, why didn't the African slaves go crazy? Well, a lot of it was their music. There's a great story of the Holocaust, you know, of somebody throwing out a note from a boxcar on the way to Auschwitz saying, "Tell them we left singing." I mean, I think it's been a way that oppressed peoples have been able to carry on, and I think music touches a part of ourselves that is almost hard to explain.
When you're in the pulpit, when you're on the altar looking at a congregation, what kind of things do you observe about how people respond to music?
Well, some music's really singable for everybody, and some music isn't. And so I always like to look out and see if people are singing. But sometimes people are clapping their hands, or they've got their eyes closed, or they're swaying, or sometimes they're singing and sometimes they're listening. But I think you can almost tell when a piece of music is really speaking to an audience or a congregation. One of my favorite songs is Joan Osborne's What If God Was One of Us? And we're going to sing it on Sunday at our 9 o'clock service, at my final 9 o'clock service. And I love that because the words, what if God was one of us, just a slob like one of us trying to find his way home. And I love that image because it helps me to relate to God. And so when we sing it, I just kind of want to dance and sway and at the same time sort of shout. And I think when people sing the doxology, praise God from whom all blessings flow, praise God, all creatures here below, praise God, ye hosts in heaven above, praise God, the Trinity of love. I mean, what we're singing about is our sense of giving God thanks for that which we really can't explain.
So that song by Joan Osborne is one of your top lists. I think you ended up with 24 songs. So I had asked you, let's use your top 10 pieces of music as a framework for this conversation. And you couldn't get there, which is evidence for why we had to have this conversation, because there's so much music that's meant so much to you.
But I think that What If God Was One of Us by Joan Osborne, I think that's a contemporary psalm. The Psalms are a part of the Bible, and they were called the hymns of David, King David. And I think that's a psalm. That's somebody wondering about God.
And the question is posed in that lyric, what would you ask him if you had one question? If you could ask one question. I was listening to it actually on the drive over here thinking, what would you ask, right? If you
I don't know, what would you ask?
I don't know. I was thinking, would I even ask a question?
I mean, I think we'll get a chance someday to get to ask those questions.
So that must have, when that song came out, did you hear it right away? Was that something that was...
I heard it right away, and then we were actually doing a youth service in my old church in Paterson, New Jersey, and I said to the kids, you guys get to pick the music this Sunday. And one of them, who played in a band, she was a drummer, she said, can we use this song? And I listened to it over and over again. I said, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about your own musical background.
Right.
Do you play instruments?
I do. I took the required piano lessons from the time I was 5 years old till I was about 14 or 15. And then when I was 15, and I never practiced enough. I mean, my piano teacher would say, Tracy, if you would just practice more, you could be really good. You have great long fingers. We have good hands. So I didn't practice enough. But then I got a guitar. I got a guitar when I was 15, and I practiced a lot. And I still, to this day, I play the piano sometimes, not in front of anybody, and I play the guitar a lot.
Now, I was doing the math, and I think, if I'm right about this, you were 10 or thereabouts when the Beatles come to America?
Yeah, I was probably 10. What year was it? It was
64 is when they come,
64, right after John F. Kennedy died.
So was their explosion or kind of pop music generally part of your life?
Oh, absolutely. I got a Beatles haircut.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Monkees and the Beach Boys. My first album, I think, was The Association. And it was Cherish and Windy. But then Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys, and my cousin John York, had this amazing vinyl collection, and he still is a huge collector of music, as are his sons, and I would just go over to his house, and he had them in his bedroom, and I would just, every time he got a new album, he would show me the album, and we would talk about the albums, and I just said, I'm going to become a vinyl collector.
There's a song from almost pre-Beatles era on your list, but I wondered which version, and that's Carole King's Up on the Roof. Did you choose that for her solo version that came
Well,
later?
what I do a lot of is I go onto Spotify and I listen to all the different versions of a song. I'll do that over and over again. But I really like that song because it reminded me of a very particular time when I was in seminary, living in New York City, living in a tenement building on the 4th floor in what was Hell's Kitchen, now called Clinton, which was not a fashionable neighborhood. I lived on the same block that the fight scene in West Side Story was filmed. And it was hot. We didn't have air conditioning, and it was summer. And I would literally go up on the roof, and I would just look at Manhattan and the Hudson River. And I think I was living on about $4,000 a year, and I just thought I was the luckiest person in the world. So going up on the roof has always been a place that, I just get a perspective. It's like a mountaintop in the city.
When I saw that song on your list, I was really struck because one of my favorite, I'm a huge fan of that late 50s, early 60s Brill Building pop. So that was originally recorded by the Drifters, but of course
I loved it
written
by the Drifters.
Goff and King. And, Carole King, as a very young woman, was part of this songwriting machine, really, in New York, where these songwriters were taking over. But you've got these young African-American men singing these songs written by these young, primarily Jewish songwriters from Queens and Long Island. But, it's a simple pop song, but that idea of going up on the roof is also a kind of freedom, an escape.
It's an escape from the drudgery of life. And especially when you think about those tenement buildings in Hell's Kitchen, in Brooklyn, in Harlem,
right.
Those buildings in the Bronx. So those were hot buildings, and the roof was the place where you could breathe the air and you could get a perspective. I'll never forget the first time I heard Carole King. She was doing a concert. She was opening for James Taylor, and I got to go to the James Taylor concert, and this woman came out and sat down at a piano, and all anybody wanted to see was James Taylor. And she started playing. And then I saw her again in Cleveland a couple years ago. It was pretty funny because it was a really gray audience.
Time moves. At that period, when you're kind of buying Jan and Dean records and things, are you also listening to other kinds of music in that period beyond pop music, say as a teenager?
Well, I went to a girls' school where we listened to classical music a lot, and my parents took me to the orchestra on a regular basis. In fact, I remember the first time I saw Leonard Bernstein was when he came to Columbus to play, his children's concerts on Saturday afternoon. So, I was always listening to orchestral music, and I was learning to play the piano. I've always been attracted to roots music. My mother was Appalachian, and part of what I was on was a journey to understand my roots and who she was. And the music of the hills and the child ballads was something I was very drawn to when I was in high school. And choral music. I've always loved choral music. And the other, I've always loved Broadway. And I think part of that is because my dad really loved musical theater, and my dad was a traveling salesman, and he had an 8-track in his car, and he just collected 8-tracks like crazy, and they were all both the music of the 40s and then the music of musical theater.
You've mentioned Bernstein and West Side Story, and A Place for Us is one of the songs on your list.
Yeah,
so
I think that's, that whole play, I think has so many levels of meaning and power and truth, and the struggle to, it's kind of like South Pacific, the whole notion of interracial marriage and relationships and race tensions and gangs and that song, There's a Place for Us. I mean, I think as somebody who's gay in this world, that song speaks to a lot of gay and lesbian people in the days before our relationships were really validated.
Where's their safety? Where's their home?
Where's their sense of home? Where's their safety? Where's their acceptance? Is there ever going to be a place for us? And it's interesting that They've just opened up a new retirement community on the west side.
Yeah.
That a couple of folks have been working on for a long time, and it's not restricted to gay and lesbian people, but it's particularly welcoming, and it's called A Place for Us.
Oh, yeah, that's great. The other musical song on here is Over the Rainbow, Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz, which I listened to after you sent me your list, the Judy Garland film version, which is the one that's in my brain. Why that song?
I think a lot of the songs on my list are about dreaming, and they're about possibilities, and they're about opportunity and vision. And first place, I just think it's a beautiful melody, and it's so clean, and I love all of the versions of it. But I think there was something about the quality of Judy Garland's young voice that was just so clear and non-verbato. Is that the word for it?
I've heard you say that dreams are ways of God getting our attention when we are trying to ignore God or run from God.
I think the whole thing of again, The Wizard of Oz, there are many layers to that story. And for me, the wizard, the man behind the curtain has always been sort of a fun image to play with. But there's also, Dorothy, who is wanting to be somewhere else besides the plains, and she ends up somewhere else. and that was a very scary movie. I was terrified every year. I was terrified every year when those bats would fly, those monkeys would fly in. I was under the table.
Yeah, I remember calling my dad. I know this part's coming, right?
Really?
So when you were in high school, so you're playing guitar, and I want to talk about a cluster of songs that ended up on your list that kind of fall, not surprisingly, kind of late high school, from about like 69 to 71. You've got Uncle John's Band by the Dead, you've got Both Sides Now, you've got American Pie, Teach Your Children. Not to say that you were listening to them all at that moment, but it's right. I think it is that moment, and I think if I look at music and people, I think most people hold on to the music of their high school years or their young adult years. If you look at our parents' generation, it's all the music of World War II. Right.
And it's not, it's great music. A lot of it's wonderful, that balladry. But it's also, it was their years of listening to music. I think one of the things that I regret about not having children is that it's hard to keep up with music when you don't have kids coming of age. But that's a very particular era of music from 68, 69, the late 60s, early 70s. It's the civil rights movement, it's the Vietnam War movement, it's the women's movement, it's Woodstock. And so, those were the songs on the radio, but those were also the songs that were speaking to my identity, and I think to a lot of people. The song by Gordon Lightfoot, again, my cousin John introduced it to me.
Sit down, young stranger.
And tell us where you've been. He came home from Europe. He took a year off and went to Europe, and he came home and he said, "Tracy, you got to hear this song. You got to hear this song." And he had a big afro and he had patched blue jeans, and he was, and he played it for me. And the truth of it is, probably of every song on that list, that's the one that really speaks to the heart of my identity issues. Because here I was, I was raised in this interfaith household. My mom was a Christian, my dad was a Jew. I was raised primarily in the German Reformed Jewish community of Columbus and Bexley. I went to the Columbus School for Girls, to this girls' school that we started every day with morning chapel. And when I was in school, they were starting in the Episcopal Church to try out these things called folk masses. And they needed a guitar player. And one of my friends said, oh, you know, Tracy can do that. She plays the guitar. We had a band called, the Czechs. Corn Czechs, wheat Czechs. I was dog chow. That's all I can remember. Anyhow, so my friend said, she can play. And so they gave me free rein. I mean, I had to play this mass music called the Freedom Mass, or and I don't think that was called. Anyway, but during communion, I got to play whatever I wanted to play. And all these people would be going up to receive communion, and there I was playing, I'm standing in the doorway, my head held in my hand, not knowing where to sit, not knowing where to stand. And that's kind of who I was. I also played Cat Stevens' Father and Son. And it was all about rebellion, and it was all about trying to figure out who I was. Both Sides Now, you know.
Joni Mitchell, yeah.
Joni Mitchell's Both Sides Now, and that was the song I chose for my senior page in high school.
Why?
Because the third verse of that song, I've looked at life from both sides now, from up and down and win and lose. And still somehow it's life's illusions I recall. I really don't know life at all. And I think that's where I was at that stage of my life.
Spiritually or
spiritually,
everywhere?
Sexually,
Yeah.
Vocationally. I was trying to figure it all out. And that's what a lot of those songs are about. Teach your children. I mean, you know, having heard Graham Nash tell the story of that song recently, and how that was really kind of speaking to his own parents. You know, those were complicated times, just like today, I guess.
And did the music, did it bridge a kind of secular spiritual world? I don't even know if you would have thought about it as that divided at that time.
Well, I think it must have, because that's the stuff I was playing in this Episcopal church while people were receiving communion, and I was very intentionally picking out the music that I was going to play.
How did it go over?
You know, I think about that a lot periodically. I guess it was fine. Nobody threw me out. I did it for a bunch of years.
Because the folk mass was, I mean, I was raised Catholic, and I remember kind of folk masses in the early 70s, and it was something my parents were kind of, I don't know what threatened is the right word, but they didn't like it. It was too weird, or it was too much like their hippie kids.
Yeah,
or,
I don't really know, what people really thought about it. But, you know, that was also the day of coffee shops in the basement, coffee houses in the basements of churches, and, you know, where young aspiring folk musicians would come and play, and I was writing music then. None of it very good, but I was writing it then.
A couple of other songs that you put on that list from that period is you know, American Pie is here, and I was teasing you that how can you still listen to that song, because I've heard it so many times. A great song, but it's out there. So talk to me about American Pie.
It happened at a very particular moment in time that was special to me. We won't go into the details of that. However, back in 2009, my spouse Emily and I walked the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And one of the things I did was I took an iPod and I put together a playlist. Because, you know, you're walking hundreds of miles, and I needed to hear some music as I walked. And there was this one day, and it was about maybe the 5th day in, and finally my blisters kind of were turning into calluses, and my backpack felt great, and we were walking through fields of hay fields and corn and poppies, and it was like that scene in The Wizard of Oz, right?
Yeah.
And I'm listening to music, and my feet felt good, and my back felt good, and my legs felt strong, and it was absolutely beautiful. And Bye Bye American Pie came on, and I sang it at the top of my lungs with my earplugs on, and I came across these 3 other peregrinos, walkers on the on the Camino, and they were Spanish, and they were just laughing at me. And I just realized, I mean, that song is how I felt that day. I also sang Happy Day by Jonathan Edwards.
That's a great song. And American Pie is a song people can sing, to your earlier point.
Yeah.
I mean, people sort of grab onto that song.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's meaningless. I mean, the lyrics are silly.
Sure, but
it's
that
great.
doesn't matter. You just recounted that song with that memory with, you know, tremendous detail, and I think songs carry memory for us.
Oh, I when I was in high school, we had to do a senior project, and my senior project was I was going to build a guitar, and I got into it and realized, oh, I have no idea how to build a guitar. So instead, I took the form of a guitar. I got that far, and I kind of put it together, and then I did a mobile, and I took all of my favorite songs. I tried to find this the other day, and I kind of collaged them into this mobile, and then I recorded into I had an 8-track, I mean a reel-to-reel, and I recorded myself playing this collage of medley of all of my favorite songs, and then I got to seminary a number of years later, and we had to do a spiritual autobiography, and I did that by songs. So I think you're right. I think they evoke particular memories. This friend, this first love, that breakup, that class, that job.
Yeah, and we replay them, I think, as we hear the songs.
We
over
replay
and
the
over.
memory,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. There's a song from that same period by the Grateful Dead, Uncle John's Band, that intrigued me as to why that made your list.
Well, it was a Grateful Dead song that I could play. I'm not a Deadhead at all.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I mean, I like some of the Dead music, but I like that song because I think the rhythms of it, you know, well, the first days are the hardest days, don't you worry anymore. I mean, it's so clean and so crisp and so clear. I think it's Jerry Garcia I really like simple music. One of the songs on my playlist is Mozart's Concerto Number 21 in C major. And the reason I like it is the simplicity of it. And I was in high school again, and I was introduced to it by my humanities teacher, my most important teacher, Janet Riley Smith, and she taught world history, philosophy, and humanities. And she was a violinist, an amateur violinist. And she taught us this song, and she said, you must listen because it's the simplest piece that Mozart ever wrote, and it was in the simplicity is the beauty. It's the simplicity.
And is that simplicity for you of melody? Is it instrumentation?
It's both. In that instance, it's the, I can't sing it, but you know, it's just one note after the other after the other. It's, you just hear the crispness of the notes, and you hear it with the violin, and you know, you have to be a good violinist to play it well. But it's also like Pachelbel's Canon in D,
which is also on your list.
You know, it's also got those just very simple, clear, clean. It's hard to write simple music.
Yeah, I mean, that's Up on the Roof is a simple song in some ways. That's a very simple melody, and it's but you can hang so much emotion on a melody like that. There's a song on here that by an artist that you and I are both big fans of. First artist we talked about, I think, which is Van Morrison's Healing Game. For me, Van is just in his voice, in the timbre of his voice, it evokes a kind of spiritual landscape for me. No matter what he's even singing, there's kind of a sound there. What draws you to Van broadly, and then that song specifically?
Well, I really like his voice, and I like the way he looks at life, and I like how he plays with his Irish roots and American blues. and kind of pulls. And some of the great, you know better than I, British rock stars did that. I mean, the Rolling Stones, you know, played with American roots music and being choir boys. And you hear that in John Lennon as well. But so Van plays with being a choir boy and that Irish Catholic upbringing that I think he wrestles with, and then sort of the American blues movement. And I love the rhythm of his sound, the way he moves his words and his instrumentation. The song "The Healing Game" is a later song of his.
Yeah.
And I remember it came out during the height of the AIDS movement, or the HIV/AIDS crisis. And it came out, so it must have come out in the 80s or 90s, I guess.
90s, yeah.
90s.
Yeah.
And I was, at that time, there were times where I was doing 2 or 3 funerals a week.
Wow.
And I was burying people my own age. And I was burying friends who were dying of AIDS. And everywhere I went and everybody I knew in New York and New Jersey and Boston, I mean, everybody was getting AIDS. And you never knew who was going to go next. And it wasn't just gay men. I was also, at that time, in Patterson, the corner where my church was a central prostitution corner in northern New Jersey. And I got to know a lot of those prostitutes because they worked there at night and I worked there in the day. And there would be some times on a Sunday morning where I'd be going to work and they'd be going to work. And Leonard Cohen's Sisters of Mercy, I mean, I came to see them truly as Sisters of Mercy. I don't know if that's what Leonard was talking about when he was writing about the sisters, but that's how I understood it. And so they were dying, and my friends were dying, and it was this really hard time. And I heard this song, and I had just been to a big AIDS service at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and I had this image that of all of my friends just kind of approaching the altar for healing with that music going on. And I always said that I wanted someday to kind of hear that song in church. And so one All Saints Day, we have this fabulous band at Trinity called the Gateway Jazz Band. And Jennifer Cochran and her great cadre of jazz, really good Cleveland jazz musicians, can do just about anything. And I said, would you do it? And she played it as people were going up on an All Saints Day to light candles to remember people they loved but saw no longer. And I guess that song, it's kind of like Where the Streets Have No Name by U2. I mean, it's that same kind of song of going back to these streets and hoping, you know, that maybe the world will get better.
You have to have that kind of optimism every day, don't you? To do what you do?
Less so here than I did in Patterson. I can't wait to see the new movie Patterson, which is filmed on location. And, you know, that was a very tough city.
Yeah.
And the South Bronx was a tough place. And Cleveland at times is a tough place. But yeah, I mean, you have to believe in the power of healing. That doesn't mean cure.
Right.
But I don't have the words of the song in front of me, but he talks about being a choir boy. And I can imagine Van Morrison as a choir boy. I mean, that's where a lot of us learned to sing, was in choir.
Did you?
Yeah. I wasn't good because I can't sing parts because I will always follow other voices. And so I had started a bluegrass band here, but they get frustrated with me because I always kind of...
You won't sing your part.
I won't sing my part.
You've got a song on here by Alex Dobkin,
oh, gosh.
Which I think was an important song to you, and I wonder if you could talk about that song because she's a woman, but also the context, because I know going to the Women's Music Festival and that whole movement, which kicks off in the 70s, was really important to you.
That movement was hugely important to me. I never went to the Women's Music Festival.
You didn't?
I did not. I didn't like to camp.
Okay.
And
see, I've envisioned of you making your pilgrimage every year.
I did make the pilgrimage there, and I took one look at it, and I left.
Yeah.
I drove up with a friend, and I looked at it and I said, oh man, I don't want to do this. I don't like camping. I don't like mud. I don't like mosquitoes.
Yeah, that comes with the festival
circuit. It does. But the Women's Music Festival was very important, and I was part of one of the early women's music collectives. We called ourselves Mentorists. And Mentorists.
Okay.
And it was in Cincinnati, and we brought Chris Williamson and Meg Christian and Holly Near and Izquierda and Alive and Alex Dobkin and all of those women musicians to town, and we would produce these concerts. 50 people, 60 people, 200 people. We thought it was wow. And I was the only person who had a 2-bedroom apartment, so a lot of them stayed with me because that's how they would do it. But Alex Dobkin was a radical lesbian feminist who moved into a commune, actually, in upper New York State. And she wrote this song called A Woman's Love. Because I'm a woman is how it starts. And it was performed a lot by a woman named Teresa Dell. And Teresa Dell was a young musician, originally from Youngstown, and then had gone to Cincinnati. And she's since died of MS. And there was this women's concert, a Teresa Dell concert, and a friend took me to the concert. And all these concerts would be in the basement of Unitarian churches. And I got there, and I looked around, and it was a room of women, and I looked around, and I wasn't comfortable with what I saw. A lot of stereotypes were going on in my mind. And then Therese started singing this song, and I thought, oh my God, she's singing to me, to who I am. And then afterwards there was a dance. And they moved all the chairs out of the way, and they were having a dance. A woman came up and asked me to dance. I said, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. And a friend drove me home. She was really mad at me. She drove me home. She said, I don't get you. You can fight for the rights of everybody, but you won't stand up to who you really are. And that was sort of my coming out time. I was 20, 21 years old. Years later, fast forward to 2004, I wrote a book called Interrupted by God, Glimpses from the Edge. And I wrote a chapter called Keep On Singing. And I wrote about the power of music. And I wanted to use this song. And my publisher is very strict about copyright. And he said, you got to get permission to quote the song. And I thought, how am I going to find her?
Right. So
I Googled her, and I found Alex Dobkin, and I wrote her a letter on my church letterhead explaining this to her. She calls or writes back and says, let me understand this. You're an Episcopal priest, you're a lesbian, and you want to quote this song, A Woman's Love, in your book? Published by the Pilgrim Publishing Company of the United Church of Christ? I said, yeah.
Why, yes, I do.
She said, well, by all means,
That's
go
great.
for it. So I was, and I've played that song at a number of same-gender weddings over the years.
I mean, that's a really important movement also when you think about music and identity, and I'm even thinking what you said before about a place for us, right? Yeah. So that, when we experience popular music, especially, it's not just what you're hearing in your bedroom on your radio, but it's a community.
Exactly, and the women's music movement was really powerful. I mean, Olivia Productions, which was the recording group, there wasn't a lot of money. People were taking huge risks. I mean, Olivia's become a significant cruise line, actually. But, this was an opportunity. One of the things that happens when you're gay or lesbian in this world is you're always translating. And you learn how to do it. You're translating on television. You're translating in the movies. You're watching, heterosexual love going on because that's all you saw back
Right.
then, right? And you learn to translate that so it worked for you. And this music of the women that I've mentioned and didn't require translation. And that's why it spoke so powerfully.
We can see ourselves very
Right.
directly, right? And
One of my
that
favorite
music.
ones was Betsy Rose's song, Live from the Very Front Row. And she writes about growing up. Betsy Rose was a preacher's kid, a PK. And she writes about growing up in church and what it was like to grow up the child of a minister. And then the very end, it's all about sitting in the front row and how bad they were and the stuff they did in church. And then at the very end, she said, and now she's sitting in the front row and it's her friend who's up there in the long black gown.
That's great. Did music play a role, do you think, as you look back on your path to the ministry, on your path through seminary? Did
Yeah, I had
music help lead you there?
Well, music helped pay for it. My first job in New York was to be the musician for a program called Night Watch, which is a youth program at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And every Friday night for 4 years, I showed up at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, and I played the music and taught the kids to sing the music for the midnight mass. But because of that, and being on staff there, I also got to be in the cathedral to hear Paul Winter's Winter Solstice. I got to be in the cathedral, actually, in one of the side chapels, because I had all the keys, to listen to Leonard Bernstein's Mass when it was performed for the first time. And so I got to, be around some really extraordinary music. But, hymnody has been a place where I have been able to preach and teach out of it. Maybe not as much as I would like to. One of the things is my retirement is a little bit sooner than I had anticipated for some health reasons. And so I'm thinking, oh, darn it, I didn't get to do this, and this. And I didn't get to do enough with hymnody in the pulpit.
You've got a couple of really interesting hymns on your list. David Haas's Servant Song, Marty Haugen's All Are Welcome, which I think really characterizes you and your approach to the congregation and to the Cleveland community. Can you talk about those songs a little bit, those hymns?
David Haas and Marty Haugen are part of sort of the new generation of hymn writers. They're both published out of a place called GIA, a publishing house. And the song, again, they're very simple melodies and very singable melodies, which is, that's always a challenge in my tradition of the Episcopal Church, of this coming from this great choral tradition of how do you hold on to this great choral music and make room for new music? And how do you hold on to the great tunes and allow new words to appear? Because, some of the theology in our hymnody isn't very good. And some of the language is just so sexist. But Marty Haugen's song, All Are Welcome, for me, describes what my ideal of church is. And it's kind of in joking called the Trinity Fight Song. And we'll sing it for my last Sunday at the 11:15 service. We're going to do great music all morning long. But at the 11:15 we'll come into that, because I think that's the song that talks about what I hope a church would be. I don't have the lyrics in front of me, and my memory's not too good, so I can't tell you. The Servant's Song, again, is another song that got me walking on the Camino. Will you let me be your servant? Let me be as Christ to you. And it's the notion that Jesus came to serve, and the idea of servant leadership, and caring for one another as we would wish to be cared for, and as we would care for Jesus himself. Those are great songs. Another batch of that music comes out of Iona, which is out of the Celtic tradition, and the island of Iona and the Iona Abbey, and the worship that they have created. Be Thou My Vision is an old Celtic hymn.
Great song.
Morning Has Broken is an old Celtic Welsh hymn, and we think of it as a Cat Stevens song, but it's really an old hymn.
Van Morrison has a great version of Be Thou My Vision. If you haven't heard it, I have to share that with you.
It's wonderful.
It's interesting when you talk about welcoming, because and the words that might be, older words that, are sexist or just feel exclusionary in that way. So I think being attentive to how music can either welcome or exclude.
Yeah, and we
important.
just sing it in church and we think nothing of it, but onward Christian soldiers marching on to war with the cross of Jesus going on before you. I mean, it's about the Crusades.
Right.
I don't want to be singing that stuff. And stuff that, maybe that's why I like Joan Osborne's, even though she uses male pronouns for God, she's still, saying, what if God was one of us? And that the idea that us means you and me as well as women. And no hymnody written before 1974 has any female imagery of God.
Stevie Wonder has a song, not on your list, called Have a Talk with God.
Oh, yes.
You've written a lot about talking with God. You've talked to me about, what does it mean to have a kind of conversation with God. Do you think music can be a conduit for that kind of conversation with God?
Absolutely, and I think that's what a lot of musicians are doing. I think they're, like poetry. I mean, it's like poetry. It is poetry, right? Lyrics are poetry. But I also think, if you look at Bach, he was a church musician, and the Bach cantatas, those were written for Sunday worship. I mean, he wrote a cantata every week, right? So that had to have been some sort of ongoing conversation with the divine. And I think in a lot of the music that I'm drawn to, I hear people wrestling with God either consciously or unconsciously.
Are there any songs that have been kind of top on your playlist in these last couple of months as you kind of have started this new part of the journey and transitioning? Any songs either on your list or maybe that just have been a comfort, a guide?
Well, it's interesting. My journey is, I've been diagnosed with this thing called FTD, frontal temporal degeneration, which is a kind of a shrinking of certain parts of my brain, mainly the semantic parts of my brain, language. And so I've actually been in silence a lot more than I've been listening to music, which has been kind of interesting, to be spending more time in silence. And I've been reading more poetry to myself than listening to music. Having said that, everything I've been hearing lately, I hear it differently. So I'm not sure I can think of a particular song. Well, As Tears Go By has come to me lately. And it's an old Rolling Stones song.
1964.
1964. It's the first song I learned to play on my guitar. But I think I'm doing a lot of remembering, so I'm going back. The song that always strikes me is the song "I'll Fly Away," and it's a song that that I sang over and over again to my mom as she was dying of dementia, and we played it at her funeral in that sense that she finally kind of got to fly away from it all. "Oh God, Our Help in Ages Past," which is probably my favorite hymn. That's been resonating with me a lot. Our hope for years to come, our shelter from the storming blast, and our eternal home. And I think finding the sense of home in God on this new road, in this new journey that I don't know where it's leading me. I think that's been speaking to me more. I like country music a lot, so I listen to that. I'm listening to some of the music that I fell in love with Emily with. "Grow Old Along with Me." I don't know if that's the title to the song.
"Grow Old with Me."
"Grow Old with Me," John Lennon's song.
One of the last songs he wrote.
Yeah, and it's interesting. "World Without End" is the way he ends the song, and that's right out of the Anglican prayer book tradition.
The song on your list that I've been thinking about a lot and thinking about as getting ready for today is Dylan's "Forever Young," may God bless and keep you always, Tracey. And thank you for doing this today.
Thank you. I love that song.
And for all that you've done for Cleveland and the community in many ways, but bringing a lot of song right to downtown and the cathedral concerts and really doing what, all that you did to kind of sustain and advance the tradition of the cathedral, but bring so much music out to people who are not there for worship, but can experience the music. But
yeah, and you can check us out on our website at trinitycleveland.org to see what kind of music we're up to. Every Wednesday through the school year, except for the month of January, we do wonderful brown bag concerts, all kinds of stuff, and we do some of it in partnership with Tri-C. So I want to thank you, and Lauren, I personally want to thank you because our friendship did begin over music, and
sure did.
And I hope we'll be singing music and talking music for a long time to come.
Yeah, I still have to come over and alphabetize your albums. So
I would love that. And by the way, Alpha Bill did a great version of "Forever Young."
Oh, okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.